today is Pam Davis, and she's going to be talking about the realities of admission to colleges and universities in 2023. This is incredibly important to us because of the Rotary Education Foundation that we sponsor, trying to make sure that our direction is correct in terms of where we spend our money and how we spend it and how much we spend. Pam has over 30 years of experience in high school teaching and college counseling, including 8 years as the Director of Life Planning at Vistamar School in Segundo, California. She has shepherded hundreds of students through the college admissions process and connected professionally with myriad college admissions officers over the years. Since 2022, she has served as a senior research associate for Level All, an up-and-coming educational technology company creating content designed to improve the outcomes of high school and college students across the U.S. As part of that effort, she recently wrote a guide entitled Inside the College Admissions Business, as well as guides to the college essay, the college interview, and building a smart college list. Pam holds a BA in English Creative Writing from Stanford University. Oh, well, you can't win them all. I went to Cal, so what am I supposed to say? And a PhD in English from Brown University. I want to also point out that she's really good at technology in terms of setting things up, and I was trying to bribe her to come every Friday and help, but she wouldn't bite. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Pam Davis.
Jack is not techno.
There we go. Okay. All right. Talk amongst yourselves while I set up my technology. I don't want it to fall off again. Can you guys hear me? Yes. Okay. Okay. You can see my title here, Navigating the College Marketplace. My philosophy in college counseling is pretty simple, but it's sometimes startling to the families I work with. The goal is not getting into college. The goal is getting out of college, having made the most of it, having had experiences there that set you up for the future you want. So it's how you go to college, not where you go, that matters. But one of the things I've worked my whole career to combat is this stress that surrounds college admissions, right? The stress that arises from this very hard to shake conviction that some colleges are golden tickets to a great life. And those colleges, which are of course always the most difficult to get into, are the brass ring we're on the merry-go-round grabbing for. Yeah, it's hard to get that ring, parents acknowledge that, but they say, isn't it worth trying? What do we have to lose? The answer is a lot. You have a lot to lose. Let me tell you 3 quick stories. Early in my college counseling career, I had the chance to attend the Harvard Summer Institute on college admissions. One thing we did was participate in a mock Harvard admissions committee meeting chaired by the Dean of Admissions, Bill Fitzsimmons, Fitz. He gave us some anonymous files, let us read and debate and render our decision, right? Admit, deny, waitlist. Then he told us what really happened. So every file was stellar. We wanted everybody. Fitz then gave us some brief training on Harvard's 1 through 6 rating scale. 1s were for students with uncommon strengths, truly rare. 2s were for the kids that most colleges would put at the top of their admit pile right away. Twos had the potential, and they write this down, to graduate from Harvard magna cum laude, and who boast, and I quote, substantial school-wide, regional, or state recognition, major contribution, and leadership, right? So your valedictorian student body presidents, your leaders of the debate club who also lead multiple other clubs. Those are twos at Harvard. Harvard even has a term for these students that I learned later on. They call them standard strong. Thousands and thousands and thousands of standard strong students apply to Harvard each year. When we all voted for this one kid that was like that, Fitz told us his perspective, Harvard's perspective. He said, I agree, this kid is fantastic, rock star, no doubt about it. He doesn't need Harvard. Star 2 comes from Yale professor William Dershowitz, who wrote a book called Excellent Sheep, The Miseducation of the American Elite. He argues that students at elite colleges are driven by the wrong things and arrive on campus having spent high school on this treadmill of achievement that sucked their souls dry. He has a quote in chapter 1 of that book that haunts me. It's from a Yale student, and the student said, I might be miserable, but were I not miserable, I wouldn't be at Yale. Story number 3. My best friend's college roommate was the dean of admission at Princeton for a long time. One night at a reunion party where the wine was kind of flowing, the conversation turned to how amazing you had to be to get into Princeton and how fun it must be to meet all those fantastic kids. The dean took another sip of wine and said, they look better on paper. You probably see where this is going. I would like to break the stranglehold that elite college admissions has on our imaginations and on our aspirations. As I've studied college admissions, I've come to understand that it's so stressful, in part, because students and families enter the game without knowing the rules that the colleges are playing by. Families think one thing is happening and something entirely different is going on. It's like everybody's out on the basketball court, but the colleges are actually playing basketball, and the kids are playing football. The colleges understand how you get points, right? You throw the ball in that little net up there, but the kids think you get points by running into the end zone. So that's the knowledge gap we want to solve for. Here's the net. You guys can see those slides? Yeah. Okay. No, what have to read. Colleges are businesses, and their admissions practices reflect their business priorities. Now this is important because when students and families understand how admissions decisions are made, they start to realize two big things that can seem contradictory. First of all, the decisions are based on the college's needs, not the student's intrinsic worth. All these colleges keep getting taken to court because student A thinks they deserve to get in more than student B, and it just wasn't fair, right? That's the narrative. Well, guess what? It's not about fairness, and it's not about who deserves what. It's about the colleges running their businesses according to their business plan. So that's the first thing you realize. It's not about your credentials. Rewarding you for your hard work is not one of the rules colleges play by. But the second thing you realize is this. As an applicant in the college marketplace today, you have a lot more power than you think you do. So I'm going to talk about how the college marketplace works and how admissions decisions are made. And along the way, I hope to debunk the myth that the hardest colleges to get into are the best colleges. And show you how when students play the admissions game according to the college's actual rules, they're actually more likely to wind up at a school where they will truly blossom. So here's what we want to talk about. How the bulk of selective colleges decide who to admit. How 96% of them, or so, do. How the most highly competitive colleges decide who to admit. These are sometimes known as highly rejected colleges in my world. Also, Ivy Plus is a term you might hear. The problem with Ivy Plus colleges, and finally, how people should choose a college. Okay, so let's dive in with selective college admissions. Here's how we're defining selective colleges. Basically, they're schools that don't just check that you got a minimum GPA and let you in. They're schools that ponder each application and decide based on more complex criteria. There are different levels of selectivity, as you know, and you can see here how they're defined, these 3 tiers. It's It's critical because these different levels of selectivity result in very different business models and stuff these colleges need to prioritize when it comes to admitting their class. So around 28 of the 4,000 colleges in the US, that's a moving number, about 28 right now, admit fewer than 10% of their applicants, and we'll call those the Ivy pluses. The number of colleges in the 10 to 20% admit rate is a moving target each year, but a ballpark is 50 to 75 schools. So overall, we're talking about under 100 schools in this extremely selective category, which is between 2 and 3% of all colleges. Another way to say it is that the majority, or that about 96% of selective colleges do not fall into that final category of extremely selective, okay? And then the majority of colleges in this country, as you can see, aren't classified as selective at all. And yet, there's a narrative we combat in the world of college admissions that it's so competitive to get into college and we are so stressed about it. Well, the narrative exists because extremely selective colleges dominate our imaginations. So let's talk about how admissions works at most selective colleges and then compare it to how it works at these crazy selective schools. This is a slide from my collection inside the college admissions business. I stole it from Levelall's platform. You can read the whole collection at levelall.com, by the way, if you make an account. Little plug from the company. College admissions are driven by 4 things. You see them up here: yield, revenue, rankings, and institutional priorities. Now, all these things are interrelated. Colleges need to reliably yield the students they admit. This gets them revenue, both in the form of tuition dollars, which many private colleges are very dependent upon, and less obviously, and this is something I've only learned recently, the yield number is directly related to the college's bond rating, and therefore to its ability to borrow money at low interest rates and improve their campus and programs and yield more students. Colleges in the 2nd and 3rd tiers of selectivity are obsessed with yield. The average yield rate at US colleges is 34%. A good rate is considered to be 50%. Some colleges yield 10% or less of their admits. Rankings influences yield because a high ranking creates demand. People want to attend a highly ranked college if they get in for some reason. They feel special and they think it's a better college. Colleges complain about rankings, like it don't mean anything, but they're obsessed with them because they're obsessed with yield. The other thing that factors in is institutional priorities. So a constant institutional priority is to admit kids who are aligned with the college's mission, which is something to keep in mind. Applicants should always study a college's mission statement to get a leg up. Beyond that, college presidents inform deans of admission each year what the year's priorities are, and admissions has to factor them in. There's a new engineering building, and we need female engineers. We have too many computer science majors, dial back on those. The oboe player is graduating. So people say in college admissions, when somebody gets a deny, oh honey, you were a piccolo player in an oboe year. What can we say? Yeah. Institutional priorities are often set to improve rankings. For example, one ranking criterion is a college's success at graduating low-income students. So a school will set a priority to attract and yield more of those. And for many colleges, a constant institutional priority is a higher yield, which also improves rankings at the end of the day. So overall, it's this big circle. So we have our 3 big admissions rules at the bulk of selective colleges. Rule number 1, admit students you can yield. Rule number 2, at tuition-dependent schools, which tend to be private schools in the 2nd and 3rd level of selectivity, admit kids who can pay at least something. And admission criteria 3, admit students who meet institutional priorities. Now, since yield is so important to colleges, let's look at it more closely. How do you yield a high percentage of your admits? There are a few different ways, and some of them are more nefarious than others. Basically, colleges try to do 2 things. They try to predict if they'll yield you, and then they try to control that they'll yield you. And here are the main strategies for getting their yield percentages up. Number 1, they become a niche school for certain populations, like Brigham Young University in Utah or the US Service Academies. Number 2, they use predictive analytics And they track demonstrated interest and sometimes factor that in at a high, give that a lot of points in the admissions process. The data science behind college admissions at schools that worry about yield has reached amazing levels. Some track when you open emails, how long you spend on their websites. They analyze how your demographics match up with students who they have yielded in the past. And they calculate, based on those students, exactly how much scholarship money they have to throw at you to incentivize you to come. Demonstrated interest includes things like signing up to be on the mailing list, speaking with an admissions officer at a fair, or things that get you sometimes actual points in the admissions process, doing a campus visit, doing an interview, and writing about the college knowledgeably in your application. All of these things you can control. The other thing that's the more nefarious stuff is when colleges engage in yield protection. Okay, these are strategies to make sure that their yield number is high. Early decision is one form of this. This is a binding contract to come if you're admitted, and colleges use it very, very strongly. Tulane University admits 60% of its class under ED, because it knows it's going to lose a lot of its admits to other selective colleges otherwise. Tulane has an overall admit rate around 10%. Their early decision admit rate is 31%. Their regular decision admit rate is 8%. Good students can often leverage early decision to help them get into colleges who use it for yield protection. That's playing the game. I usually advise students not to play the game, but you can play the game that way. Another yield protection colleges use, this is our 100% favorite one in college admissions, is waitlists. In this strategy, the college waitlists you if they think there's no way they'd be your first choice. You're clearly going to go somewhere fancier, you're overqualified, or you're going to have options that fit you better. You haven't demonstrated enough interest, you haven't shown them you're excited. They don't think you're going to come, so they waitlist you. If you opt to stay on the wait list, that is actually a sign you're interested, at which point, no lie, some college will call you up on the telephone, you student, and say, if we admit you, will you come? And they ask for a verbal commitment before they'll send you the acceptance. It's yield protection at its worst. Students don't get into what they thought was their safety school. They don't understand why, because they don't know the rules. They spiral, and their families lose their minds. That's what happens. The number 4 way colleges get a high yield is they maintain a high ranking. So people get all obsessed with them and come to them regardless. And that brings us to the Ivy Plus schools. These are the schools that are reliably at the top of the US News rankings year after year. The dream schools that nobody can dream of saying no to if they get in. Stanford and Harvard yield 84% of their admits. Why? Why is this? Are they delivering you the world's best education? No, they are not. You heard my bio, I went to Stanford. I say this with some confidence. My daughter went to Brown. Lovely education, not the best in the country. Are they actually opening doors you otherwise never would be able to walk through? In most cases, no. Studies show that students whose lives are most profoundly affected by attending an Ivy Plus school are those who come from the lowest income quartile. For those students, their Ivy Plus degree does facilitate social mobility, and this is the good part, Ivy Plus schools are rich, generally. So they fully fund these students. They graduate debt-free. Those are the students who need Harvard. Most people want to go to these schools primarily because of the name, let's be honest, the status, the perception that when employers see that name on a resume, the seas will part and the path to a beautiful life will open up and be there for the walking. They don't really think too hard about what learning opportunities the college offers for them specifically, or whether they'll grow and develop there. They believe that the credential alone does the talking. But the impressive credential, it turns out, only opens a few kinds of doors. And the doors it does open are very specific to those schools' institutional priorities as they play out in their admissions process. So how do Ivy Plus schools admit students? They don't worry about yield. So demonstrated interest, a hugely powerful factor you can leverage to your advantage in most selective college admissions, doesn't talk. They don't worry about tuition revenue. They're need blind, they meet full demonstrated need of all the students who attend, so money doesn't talk, except if it's major money, then it talks. They don't worry about rankings because they're already highly ranked, and because of the way rankings work, which I wish I had another half hour to tell you guys about, that's not going to change. So that leaves institutional priorities. And elite schools have very lofty priorities that their admissions decisions directly reflect. IB Plus's institutional priorities are things like change the country. They want to battle the historic inequities in the US. They want to level the opportunity playing field, especially in US leadership across various sectors. Create cutting edge new knowledge and innovation is a second priority of theirs. They want to be at the forefront of the most important research and development in multiple fields. Change the world. They want their schools to be associated with initiatives that better people's lives across the globe. It's summed up in Princeton's motto, which is in the nation's service and in the service of all nations. That's their motto. Only a handful of applicants will help elite colleges fulfill this mission. Who are they? Students who have already proven that they're change makers at high levels, or they're connected to change makers at high levels, their parents. High-achieving, ambitious students from groups historically underrepresented in American leadership, and students who can help other students rise through the economic ranks through their already existing connections. Of course, there's constant scrutiny on and legal action against the admissions practices of elite schools. But their practices exist in the service of their mission, and their mission is not going to change. And they've actually been quite successful so far at fulfilling it. An eye-opening study just came out at the end of July from a group called Opportunity Insights. In looking at admissions, enrollment, and outcome trends at Ivy Plus schools, they found what previous studies have found, which is that Ivy Plus grads' average mid-career earnings aren't significantly different from people with similar grades and test scores in high school who went to other places, okay? The value add isn't that much. However, Ivy Plus grads, this study found, are significantly more likely to end up in the top 1% of earners. In part because the study showed Ivy Plus grads are significantly more likely to work at prestigious firms. You can read this study. McKinsey, Goldman Sachs, those are the places that recruit at these schools, right? So if a prestigious firm and the top 1% of wealth are your goal, an Ivy Plus might help. But let's keep in mind, it's a lot easier to end up in the top 1% when you're already there, when your parents are in that bracket, right? Generational wealth is a thing. And this study confirmed that children of wealthy parents still, even now, have a much higher admit rate at elite colleges than students in lower income tiers. So there's more of them on campus to begin with. This is a graph from the study. We see, this is the income bracket of the parent across the bottom and the admit rate on the vertical. So we see an advantage, an admissions advantage, with the lowest income and the highest income applicants, with the most wealthy students, that's the top 0.1% there at the end of the graph, the most wealthy students enjoying almost a 30% admit rate, while these kids in the middle income at the bottom are down at around 2%. The bottom line is that the deck has to be stacked in your favor if you aspire to an Ivy Plus. And unless you want a career in law or finance at a high-powered firm, you're probably not going to make any more money by going there than you would otherwise. To that economic fact, let's add this. Parents not eligible for financial aid will need to fork out approximately $320,000 over the course of 4 years. I think Stanford's cost of attendance this year is $87,000, 1 year, which they're willing to do because they think the school will set their kids up for the future. If they can't afford to do that, if they had to dip in their retirement or go into debt, it's a bad idea. If they can afford it, you might want to think it through. Buy them a house. Invest in an ETF. That's going to set them up a lot better for the future. And here's the kicker. They'll likely have a better college experience somewhere else. Because when you aim at and apply to, and potentially even get into, a bunch of elite colleges, when that's where you focus your energy and your ambition, here's often what happens. Better doors close, and students are potentially setting themselves up for a rough road ahead. So here are the problems with loading your college list up with the most highly selective institutions. First of all, misplaced time and energy during the application process impedes better outcomes. I'm not even backing up to how much of a rat race high school becomes when you start off with this goal, right? If you haven't seen The Race to Nowhere, the movie, I highly recommend it. It's very time consuming and it's focus diverting to apply to these schools, reducing the time and more importantly, the desire you have to position yourself strategically at the next level schools. Second, multiple rejections from these schools can have complex effects, no matter how much you're expecting it, no matter how much you know you're probably not going to win the lottery, right? First of all, it activates the Groucho Marx syndrome with your other yeses, right? I don't want to belong to a club that would have me as a member. I'm obviously not good enough. Even when you get into schools that are other people's first choice and other people's dream school, the school has a little bit of a stink on it, right? They don't quite measure up psychologically. Second, the parent-child dynamic can come into play big time here. Often, in my experience, it's the parent who has encouraged the child to apply with a narrative that's like, why not? Of course it's a long shot, but why don't you throw your hat in the ring? You hear that one a lot. Throw your hat in the ring. You never know. Look at all you got going for you. Well, you do know, okay? As a college counselor, you explain gently that actually we do know. But they apply anyway. And even though everyone was well aware that admission was unlikely, knew this intellectually, their child still feels less than when they get rejected. Someone didn't want them. That doesn't feel good. And they know also that if they'd gotten in, their parents would have been beside themselves with pride. So they've disappointed their parents just a little bit. Now, I don't know if this video will play with this technology here, but let me see if it will. Is there sound? Okay, you don't need the sound. You can, they're screaming, okay? They're just all screaming. This is posted on Stanford's YouTube. They're just reading their Stanford admission note. This is my favorite. Yeah, that's it. Okay. Perfect. Okay, so with the sound, I mean, you can imagine. They're screaming, they're losing their minds, okay? And I alternate between smiling and cringing at this because when you back up and think about it, it's really a gigantic overreaction. And it does lead to this, which is the problem with getting into these colleges, okay? First of all, the pressure to go. Saying no doesn't feel like an option. Look at my parents' reaction, oh my gosh. So you end up there even if it doesn't actually feel right, and this happens more often than you think. I used to be so proud when my students would say no to a super competitive school and instead go to one where they knew they'd shine. I would actually have a slide on it at my open house presentations to prospective parents. My student who chose St. Olaf over Northwestern because he knew he'd be a music star at St. Olaf, and he was. My other student who chose the University of Puget Sound over the University of Chicago because he won the most prestigious scholarship at Puget Sound and had a slew of opportunities waiting for him before he even set foot on campus. What gave these kids the strength to make that choice was parents who legitimately did not care about brand because they understood the true definition of a good college experience. And that brings us to the last problem, which is when you get in, okay? So if you actually get in, you have to, if you actually go, you have to deal with being there, right? And that's a lot, trust me. You're most likely average all of a sudden when you were used to standing out and getting noticed, right? Your standard's strong now, so you're getting C's, trust me, I know. You might not be chosen for opportunities anymore the way you'd be at a school where you're a top student. The pond you're now swimming in, instead of making you feel good about yourself, causes your self-esteem to drop. You start to see yourself differently, and you need a lot of maturity to maintain your confidence. I don't know if you guys have ever read Malcolm Gladwell's David and Goliath, that book, but I highly recommend it. He argues that you should never go to the most selective college that admits you if you want to maximize your chance of a successful outcome. You can also watch his TED Talk, which is called on YouTube, Google Why You Shouldn't Go to Harvard, Malcolm Gladwell. Awesome. So how should kids choose a college? What does a positive and impactful college experience look like? First, we have to talk about what having a happy life means, because you're never going to convince most people that having an Ivy Plus credential doesn't help open doors. I hear this refrain constantly. But here's the issue. Here's how you can talk to people who think this. The doors they open may not be the doors your children and grandchildren want to walk through. The doors to intensely competitive financial firms and law firms where people work 80-hour weeks because they're willing to be miserable, like our Yale student, in order to be part of the 1%, may not be the doors to happiness and well-being for you. They may. I'm not saying that's wrong for everybody. They may, but they may not be for you. The doors that connections with those 1% open may not ultimately be the most desirable doors. It all depends on what you want. When I counsel students who are aiming at Ivy Plus institutions, I ask them to approach the decision very intentionally, to not fall victim to the frenzy, to know exactly why they want it, what experiences they're aiming to have that this college can provide, and what their success plan is when they confront the inevitable challenges, when the bloom comes off the rose, right? I ask them to think through all aspects of the life they dream of living in 20, 30 years to fully imagine it. It was no accident that my title at Vistamar, my school, was the Director of Life Planning, not the Director of College Counseling. Fortunately, we have robust research-backed data about the college experiences that matter most at the end of the day, and therefore the criteria students should be using, along with their own authentic priorities and needs, to vet their college lists. Go on campus, I tell them, and ask as many students as you can which of these experiences they've had or expect to have. This is my last slide. The Gallup Alumni Survey has now surveyed 95,000 adults over multiple years and found that the following college experiences, not the institution you attend, have risen to the top as having the strongest correlation with adult thriving, which is measured as self-reported well-being in 5 realms. Financial would be only one of them. Social, physical, community, and sense of purpose. The first 3 experiences have to do with the support you had at the school, especially from faculty, and the next 3 have to do with the opportunities you had for experiential learning. Participants rate how strongly they agree with each of these statements. So I'll read them quick and you think about, did you have or do these things in college? Would you agree? I had at least one professor who made me excited about learning. I had professors who cared about me as a person. I had a mentor who encouraged me to pursue my goals and dreams. I worked on a project that took a semester or more to complete. I had an internship or job that allowed me to apply what I was learning in the classroom. I was extremely active in extracurricular activities and organizations while I attended. If you have 3 or more of these factors, it correlates with thriving adulthood, and the more you have, the more you thrive. Trust me when I tell you that these 6 experiences are all more difficult to have at an Ivy Plus school. Not impossible, just a lot more difficult. Here's what I'll say to close. If a business doesn't deliver quality and value for our money, we don't patronize it. And if it does, we flock to it. Things are the other way around in the college marketplace. There, in many cases, it's a college's name, not the education it's delivering, that has the customers lined up outside the door. Meanwhile, there are hundreds of colleges you've never heard of, changing lives, launching futures, and there are hundreds of trade and tech schools, apprenticeships, corporate training programs doing the same thing. In my view, if we want the best for our kids, we need to redefine best. I think it's incumbent upon us to be smart consumers of the college marketplace so our kids wind up at places where they'll thrive. Thank you.
Pam can stay around for some questions because she's a little bit past time. Pam, I do have for you